Okay, we are back with the 1993 four-cylinder YJ again. We just added power steering to it, factory power steering. So here's the old stuff. If you remember, this was a very stripped down, zero option Jeep that had nothing. No, not even a radio, no radio antenna, nothing. So this is the manual box. This is the idler pulley that was in place of the pump. And then you've got the connector shaft goes from the steering box up to the steering column. It is a different shaft. This pitman arm is also different too. So you do need the stuff that's for power steering. We went ahead and grabbed a setup out of the junkyard, out of a pick apart. So I can give you a quick run through on what you can expect if you want to change from manual steering to power steering on one of these YJs, or this will also help you if you need to replace parts. So the first thing that we did was we de-adjusted the belt, took the belt off because it's a different belt, and then we pulled off this assembly. After that, I pulled the air cleaner box, has to come out because it's in your way. Now, on the top of this shaft, if you have the steering wheel set straight, there will be a bolt up there beyond the universal. Let me get a light, you might be able to see it. So, up under there, there's that bolt. You see a universal joint and then a bolt. So you take that bolt out. That bolt fits both shafts. So you don't have to worry about that there's different bolts. Now you go down this end, the other end of that steering shaft, the same bolt. You're going to need a 1/2 inch universal socket or a swivel with a 1/2 inch on the end. You get a long extension to get all the way up top here, and you're going to need a ratchet, and you'll undo it from up here. So these are the things you want to do before you put the Jeep up in the air. The rest of the work's going to be done from underneath. Let me pause it and we'll get the Jeep up in the air. Okay, we are now under the Jeep. So once you've removed your air box, you've removed your old belt and the adjuster idler pulley off of the bracket, you've removed your bolts from the top and bottom of that steering shaft. You're going to want to come over here and pull the cotter pin out of the drag link, take the nut off the drag link, and remove the drag link. You might be able to bang on this a bunch of times with a heavy hammer and it just pops off, or just use a pickle fork. If you don't know what a pickle fork is, this is a pickle fork for separating tie rod ends and things like that, ball joints. It's not always the ideal thing, but sometimes it's the only thing that you can get in with, because that usually tears up and destroys your boot. So once you've popped that off, you're going to come over here. You're going to pull this bolt, because this bolt is blocking this bolt. So remove this bolt out of the frame. Then you're going to remove this bolt, this bolt, this bolt, and this will be a bolt with a nut on the other end, because the manual box only has 3 ears on it. But you will reuse all of these bolts. You just will not reuse the nut that's on this. Alright, at that point the box should come down. You remove the steering shaft. We had previously had this apart because we built this vehicle, so the shaft just came right out, no problem. We didn't have to fight it. So once you have that all out, The next thing that I recommend doing is take your new shaft, the shaft here, take your replacement shaft that's for power steering, and I suggest putting a little spray lube in the end of this, some fluid film, something, and you're going to get it back up inside there. There's the shaft, and it runs, back up to your steering column. So you're going to get that back up in there, and you're going to slide the bolt through it. It only goes in one way. Well, I guess technically maybe it could go in two ways, but it needs to go in the same way you took the other one out. So the bolt needs to go in from the passenger side to the driver's side. So the threaded part needs to be on the driver's side when you slide that up onto the steering column. Now this end of it, your steering box end, only it only goes on the box one way. There is a flat spot inside, and there's a flat spot on the splines on the power steering box. So it only goes in one way. So now the next thing you're going to want to do, now that you have that in and you've got the bolt through it up at the top, is you're going to want to unbolt your sway bar. The links don't have to come undone. Undo these. These are nut and bolt on the passenger side. Take the two bolts out of this side. When you unbolt it, the suspension, if you have it up in the air like I do, the suspension is going to come down a little bit, and it's going to pull the sway bar way out of alignment. But you need to do that because you're going to take and you're going to put the return line, screw it into the box. Have it off of the bottle. Just screw the return line into the box. Then you're going to have to take the pressure line that runs up to the pump, and you're going to want it laid up inside here, because see, it's got this big weird S-bend in it. So you're going to need it up inside there. You're going to need the sway bar completely out of your way, and put the steering box onto the steering shaft, stick the bolt through it, and then you're going to have to reach up in here. With the box will be dropped down farther because you can't get your hand in where it is there. So with the sway bar down, the box can hang low enough where you can get your hand up on there to screw that fitting into the box. Now these lines have O-rings on the end. Make sure the O-ring is on there. Make sure there's not an old O-ring in the steering box on either of these holes. The same thing with the pump. Make sure there's not an old O-ring in the pump where the pressure line screws into it. You need to lubricate the O-rings. A little oil, a little penetrating fluid, some fluid film, whatever. But you need to lubricate the O-rings. So you're gonna have the box hanging down, attached to the steering shaft that goes to the column. You're gonna screw that in, and then you're gonna tighten it. Now you can see it is almost touching the box, and it actually somehow, the way it's bent, is perfect to go between those two bolts up here on the right here. It actually snakes between these two bolts on your radiator. So you want to tighten it with it like that. The other line is screwed in all the way, but I did leave it loose enough to where I can move it, the return line, because I didn't know if I would have to move it to line it up with the bottle up top. So that one I did leave loose. The return line you can get to tighten it that last little bit from up top. These lines both used an 18mm wrench. So once you have your line tightened down, your pressure line, you're going to take your steering box and you're going to push it up in there and push the bolts through. You're just going to, because these you just leave them in the frame. So you're going to start these bolts, make sure all four of them are started, and then tighten them down, and it's 70 or 80 foot-pounds with the torque wrench. And then you're going to put this bolt back in and tighten it. Then go ahead and put your sway bar back up, tighten those bolts. In my case, because I'm on a lift and everything is hanging, we had to put a dead man under the back to keep it so we wouldn't tip the Jeep off the back, because we also had to put a dead man under the axle here next to the pumpkin, and we had to compress the suspension enough to line up the sway bar again. So once you have your sway bar bolted back up, go ahead and put your drag link back in, put the nut on, tighten it down, put your new cotter pin through there. And then that should be the end of what you need to do under the vehicle. Some of these things I'm going through here, if you need to replace that pressure line, you're going to have to go through the same stuff. The only other way that I can think to do it is you would have to drain the coolant and pull the radiator. And then you could probably get to it from up top. I didn't want to drain the coolant and pull my radiator. So the easiest thing for me, it's way faster and easier to just pull the bolts out of the sway bar, drop the sway bar, and that allows you to have the box hang down sufficient enough to get that line on there. Alright, I'm going to pause it and we'll get the vehicle back down and we'll go over the rest of the setup. Okay, we're back down again. So once you'll have your pressure line laying up in here. Now, the pressure line has this. I don't know what it is. I'm guessing it's a pressure relief valve of some sort. Since we got ours out of the junkyard, we had what was left of this line, and we were able to just take this off and screw it into the new line. The new line does not come with this. I don't even know if you can buy it. I'm guessing you can, but we didn't have to, so I didn't look it up. But you need to be aware of that. So we've got the lines all run up here. All the hoses are disconnected, nothing's hooked up. The next thing that you can do is mount your bottle. The lid's just off of this, that's why it looks funny. You can mount your bottle. The bottle mounts right here. Let me get the light again. It mounts to the radiator. So this bolt that holds the shroud, and then this one up here. So you're gonna need a bolt to go into this. There's already a nut welded to the back from the factory on this particular radiator. This is the one that we installed. It's in one of the other videos, and there should be a link to it if you want to get this same one. We also got a brand new return line, the metal part with the hose. So that runs up here. It just hooks in here. We put a clamp on it. A squeeze clamp would have been sufficient. I don't have one laying around that's that size. The manufacturer of the hose actually has a squeeze clamp down there on the other side. Because it's a return line, there's nothing on there. There's no pressure on the side. So you've got your bottle all hooked up. That's all done. Go down the bottom, tighten up the metal part of this line. Because I said leave it loose. I said screw it in, but leave it loose enough where you can move the line if you needed to. So at this point, you've got it all hooked up. Tighten that line. It should be an 18 millimeter, or at least mine was. You can get to it right through here. You can see the metal shiny line down there, straight down there. Okay, you're only going to get a little bit of a turn at a time on it, but it needs to be tight. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to have both your lines are going to be off on the pump to mount the pump. So when you mount this pump, it uses the same adjuster jack bolt that was on there for the adjuster on the manual. The difference here is going to be on the bottom of this pump, there's actually a stud sticking out, that will go through the adjuster block and then through the metal adjuster bracket on the bottom. The piece that was on here did not have a stud going through all that. It had a bolt going through from the front and then into the adjuster on the idler. So there is a change there. It was a little bit of a pain in the butt. Don't get frustrated trying to get that stud to go through the adjuster block and then through the adjuster bracket on the bottom. It will go with the pulley already on. So once you have that on, put the nut on there and leave it, run it in, but leave it loose. On the back of this, there are 2 bolts that go in from the back. The one that's on the bottom is a real pain, and once you get it started, you're going to need a ratchet wrench to run it in. This is the top one, so get the bottom one started. Then what I did was I put the top one in. I ran the top one in to almost where it was snug. I got this run in. This bolt is the same bolt as the unit that came off of here. So once you've got your adjuster on there and the nut is run in, but it's loose enough where you can still move this. This is loose to where you can still move this, and the same with the 2 bolts that go in from the back of the bracket. It's kind of overkill as far as I'm concerned. I don't know why there's 2 bolts, but there is. Go ahead and put your new belt on. The new belt is routed exactly the same as the belt you took off. It is a different belt because this pulley is larger than that idler pulley that was here previously. So once all that's done, go ahead and run your jack screw in at the bottom there until you have, until you're adjusted. You want a little bit of deflection. You don't want this so tight that you can't push it at all, because you will burn out bearings on these accessories in the water pump. Once all that's done, it's adjusted where you want it. Tighten that nut down, tighten this down, and then tighten your 2 bolts on the back. Like I said, the ones on the back ended up using a ratchet wrench. I think they were 9/16 off the top of my head. Once all that's done, then go ahead and put your pressure line in. Again, there's an O-ring on the end of this. Make sure there's not an old O-ring down inside here, because it will make it leak. Make sure you have a new O-ring on here. Put some type of lubricant on the O-ring. Screw this in, tighten it down. Go ahead and take your other return hose. It comes off the bottom of the bottle, runs into the bottom of the pump. Again, this probably had a squeeze clamp, but I don't have one laying around. Put the clamp on and tighten it. So at this point, you are complete. Make sure that you went back. If you didn't do it initially, make sure you went back the bottom of the steering shaft and tighten that bolt down there. And the same thing with this end of the steering shaft. Make sure you tighten that bolt also. Those 2 bolts, make sure we put them in earlier. If you just put them in or started them, make sure they're tight. You go back over everything, make sure you tightened everything down. Okay? Once all that's done, we're going to take power steering fluid. I don't have any, so I haven't gotten to this point yet. I got to run out to the store. You're going to fill this most of the way with power steering fluid. You're going to raise the front end off the ground so the wheels are not touching the ground, and I suggest putting this back on when you do this, because it's going to burp and you don't want power steering fluid all over everything, making a big mess. So once you get the wheels off the ground, you've got fluid in there, you're going to get in the driver's seat and without starting the vehicle, you are going to turn the wheels all the way one direction as far as it'll go, and all the way back the other direction as far as it'll go. You gotta go back and forth several times. Come out here, check the fluid level, put more fluid in as needed. Go back and do that again, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You're gonna keep doing this until the fluid level doesn't need to be topped off. Once you get to the point where the fluid level does not need to be topped off, then go ahead and start it and do the same thing. Run it back and forth a couple times. Come out, check your fluid with the engine running. Okay? And you're going to do the same thing as before. You're going to add fluid as needed, run it back and forth with the wheels off the ground, engine running, and keep topping this off. Once this no longer needs to be topped off, then you should be good. Then you can put the vehicle back down on the ground, put your air cleaner box back on, and go for a test drive. You know, check for leaks. The reason this is still out is I want this out so I can make sure when this is all bled out that I don't see anything leaking. This box is just in the way for you to be able to really easily look down in there. Plus, if there is a leak or something's wrong, you need to get back in there to work on this, you don't want to have to take the damn box back out again. It is a little bit of a pain in the ass to take out. Okay? And so that is doing the conversion from a manual steering to a power steering. It should be similar on the V6, on the straight six. Like I said, this is a 93. 93, we're using actual power steering fluid, not ATF, on this particular type of pump because it's got the separate reservoir. Usually on these, you need to put power steering fluid in. I haven't looked in the manual. I could probably look real quick and see what it says for fluids. Okay, so here we are in the 1993 owner's manual. It states that you want to check the fluid with the engine not running. And fluid type is Mopar power steering fluid. Do not use automatic transmission fluid. So there's your answer from Mopar in 1993. So I was incorrect, I guess, about checking the fluid while the engine's running, but you definitely want to run it back and forth with the engine running. I guess shut it off then, check your fluid. Top it off as needed, run it some more, run the wheels back and forth while they're off the ground, shut it off, check your fluid. Once you don't need to add fluid, then you should be good. It should be full. Okay? Hopefully this helps you guys out, at least with a couple little tips as far as the lines, the box, things like that. Dropping the sway bar to give you more room to work on the lines. Because, like I said, as far as I'm concerned, it's a hell of a lot easier to drop that sway bar to access that power pressure line for the power steering than it is to drain your whole coolant system and pull the radiator and the fan shroud. So that's the end of that. Like and subscribe. See you all next time.